They told me it was impossible. A regular guy with no construction experience building a mountain cabin by hand, 12 miles from the nearest paved road? 6 years of weekends, frozen fingers, blistered hands, every dollar I owned poured into these logs. I did it anyway. My fortress, my silence, my soul in every nail. Then the HOA came to take it all. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, strutted up my hand-planed steps in her pressed khakis, seizure notice flapping like a victory flag. 30 days to demolish or we own this land, she smirked, boots scuffing the deck I sanded at 5 a.m. while she slept in her cookie-cutter suburb. The mountain air still smelled like fresh sawdust. I didn't say a word, because what Karen never expected was something I'd buried under my foundation 6 years ago. Something from 1892. Something that would make her surveyor's tape measure drop and her face drain of every ounce of color. One yellowed page that would change everything. What would you do if they tried to steal your blood and sweat? And where are you watching from? Drop your city below. I read every comment. Let me tell you how this all started. My name's Marcus Thompson, and 6 years ago I was just another guy running a small electrical contracting business, trying to keep my head above water after losing my wife Sarah to cancer. Sarah had this dream, see? She'd sketch these little cabin designs on napkins during her chemo treatments, talking about a place in the mountains where we could watch the sunrise without hearing traffic. Somewhere the air tastes like pine needles, she'd say, pencil shaking in her thin fingers. The hospital always smelled like disinfectant and despair, but her sketches smelled like hope. She never got to see that sunrise. In 2018, a year after we buried her, I found myself driving mountain roads every weekend, looking for peace. That's when I spotted the for sale sign on raw land in Pinewood Heights development. 2.1 acres of sloped terrain covered in snow-heavy pines, 12 miles from the nearest paved road. The morning frost crunched under my work boots as I walked the boundaries, or what I thought were the boundaries. The real estate agent was Karen Whitmore, a sharp-dressed woman who talked fast and smiled like a shark. Perfect for someone who appreciates privacy, she said, designer heels clicking on granite outcrops. No restrictions, no committees, just you and nature. $47,000 later, I owned my piece of wilderness. Karen assured me it was unrestricted mountain property, perfect for your blue-collar budget. The way she said blue-collar tasted like condescension, but I was thinking about Sarah's sketches. 6 years of weekends followed. Every Friday night, driving up with a thermos of coffee that grew cold during the 3-hour climb. The silence up there was so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. I cleared the foundation spot exactly where Sarah had imagined it, facing east for sunrises she never got to see. I taught myself everything. YouTube, university, and stubborn determination. The smell of fresh sawdust became my morning prayer, better than any church service. Every board cut by hand, every nail driven with memory of her smile. Neighbors thought I was crazy, but they didn't understand what that place meant. Elena Rodriguez, an elderly widow 2 lots over, would bring homemade tamales wrapped in dish towels that still held warmth from her kitchen. Tom Bradley, a disabled vet, would stop by to admire the electrical work and share coffee that tasted like honesty and shared purpose. By year 6, I was installing the final touches, Sarah's favorite copper drawer pulls in the kitchen she'd designed. That's when Karen returned. She climbed out of her white BMW like she owned the mountain, clipboard clutched like a weapon. 6 years had changed her from real estate agent to HOA president, and power had made her meaner. "Mr. Thompson," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your illegal structure." Illegal. The word hit like a slap. "What's illegal about it?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands. She consulted her clipboard like a judge reading a death sentence. HOA bylaws require architectural committee pre-approval for structures exceeding $250,000. Your project, appraised at $285,000. 45 days to demolish or we'll seize the property for community use. I stared at her, tasting copper fear. What HOA? This was unrestricted when I bought it. Karen's smile could have frozen hell. "Things change, Mr. Thompson. People like you need to understand there are rules in civilized communities." People like you. Working class. Dispensable. The mountain wind shifted, carrying pine scent mixed with the diesel exhaust from her idling BMW. Sarah's dream was about to become my nightmare. The next week, Karen made good on her threat. A certified letter arrived, official HOA violation notice with $1,000 daily fine starting immediately. $1,000 every single day for building a cabin on my own land with proper county permits. I called the number on the letterhead. Whitman and Associates, Denver's premier HOA enforcement firm. The lawyer sounded like he charged by the syllable. Mr. Thompson, your structure violates Community Standards Article 12, Section 4. Immediate compliance required or face escalated legal action. But this was unrestricted land when I bought it. HOA incorporation supersedes previous land use assumptions. Good day. Click. The fines kept mounting. Day 7, $7,000. Day 14, $14,000. Each notice arrived with debt collector precision, stamped and certified like Karen was building a legal fortress around my cabin. At the next community meeting, Karen stood at the podium like a prosecutor presenting evidence. The community center reeked of burnt coffee and nervous energy. About 30 residents filled folding chairs, most nodding along as she painted me as a neighborhood menace. When people ignore community standards, chaos follows, she declared, clicking through blown-up photos of my cabin. Mr. Thompson's defiance threatens everyone's property values and our community's harmony. The way she said defiance made building a home sound like domestic terrorism. But here's where I got my first education in HOA warfare. After the meeting, Elena Rodriguez cornered me by the coffee pot, weathered hands shaking as she poured herself a cup strong enough to wake the dead. "Marcus, I need to show you something," she whispered, glancing around nervously. 3 years ago, Karen forced me to tear down my husband's workshop using these exact tactics. She pulled out a thick manila folder. I kept everything because something felt wrong. Elena spread evidence across the table like a detective solving a cold case. Photos of expensive homes throughout Pinewood Heights, massive structures built after the HOA rules supposedly went into effect, none with architectural committee approval. "This belongs to Karen's brother," she said, pointing to a sprawling log mansion. "Built in 2021. Cost over $500,000. No committee review, no fines, no harassment." Another photo showed an elaborate lake house addition. Karen's best friend, $400,000 project, started 6 months after they red-tagged my husband's workshop. The largest photo showed a commercial workshop complex. Karen's husband built this for his business partner. Look at the permit date. 6 months after my cabin was finished. Value, $680,000. No HOA approval anywhere in the paperwork. My old boss used to say selective enforcement was just discrimination with a clipboard. Looking at Elena's evidence, I finally understood. HOA rules apparently only applied when you couldn't afford lawyers to fight back. How many families has she targeted? 12 over 5 years, Elena replied, voice carrying decades of watching bullies pick on the powerless. All working folks, all without resources. She targets people she thinks will fold. That weekend, I drove through Pinewood Heights documenting every structure built after the alleged rules went into effect. The pattern was unmistakable. Working people got violations, wealthy friends got passes. I'd learned enough about discrimination law during Sarah's medical battles to recognize a federal case. Selective enforcement based on economic status was textbook housing discrimination. Monday morning, I filed a detailed complaint with the State Fair Housing Authority. Pattern and practice of targeting blue-collar residents while protecting wealthy insiders. Karen's response came Tuesday like a coordinated military strike. She arrived at dawn with Dale Whitmore, her husband's cousin and county building inspector. Family connections ran deeper than my foundation. The morning air carried pine scent until their diesel truck polluted my sanctuary with exhaust fumes. "Emergency safety inspection," Dale announced, clipboard ready for battle. He spent 2 hours manufacturing violations with my electrical work. Every connection made to professional standards suddenly became substandard DIY installation endangering neighborhood grid stability. I watched him invent problems where none existed, his cologne mixing with Karen's perfume until my cabin felt violated by their presence. "Red tag," Dale concluded with satisfaction. "Structure deemed uninhabitable pending professional remediation by licensed contractors only." But here's what Karen didn't expect. While Dale fabricated his inspection report inside, I was outside recording everything on my phone. His truck license plate, his admission of family relationship, his obvious coordination with Karen. 43 days remaining, Mr. Thompson. Karen smirked, boots deliberately scuffing the deck I'd spent weeks sanding smooth. Clock's ticking much louder now. The sound of her heels on my handcrafted boards felt like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the diesel rumble of their truck. After they left, I sat in my cab tasting copper anger mixed with steel determination. Tom Bradley's number was still in my contacts from community meetings. "Tom, I'm in a fight I didn't start, but I'm going to finish." "Roger that," he replied with military precision. "What's the tactical situation?" "Family corruption, selective enforcement, and they just handed me video evidence of conspiracy." Tom's laugh carried grim satisfaction. "Marcus, sounds like they gave you their entire playbook. Time to turn their tactics against them." The war for my cabin was declared, but for the first time since Karen's threat, I felt armed to fight back. 2 weeks after the red tag incident, Karen escalated to full financial warfare. A lien notice arrived at my house in town, not just for the mounting daily fines hitting $31,000, but threatening my primary residence. She was trying to put my actual home at risk over a cabin dispute. The certified mail envelope smelled like legal trouble and tasted like fear when I tore it open with trembling hands. I called my insurance company the next morning thinking they'd want to know about potential legal issues. That turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. "Mr. Thompson, we're conducting an immediate review of your policy due to ongoing litigation exposure," the agent said, voice cold as January mountain wind. "Structures under legal dispute create significant liability concerns for our company. But the cabin's not even covered under this homeowner's policy." "Doesn't matter. Pending litigation affects your overall risk profile. You have 30 days to resolve this situation or face complete policy cancellation." The implications hit like a sledgehammer. Lose insurance, lose my electrician's license, lose my livelihood. Karen was systematically destroying my entire life, one calculated legal maneuver at a time. That evening, Elena called with information that changed the game completely. "Marcus, I did some serious digging after our conversation," she said, voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd discovered buried treasure. "Brent Whitmore, Karen's contractor husband, he owns 40% of Mountain States Insurance, the exact company threatening your policy cancellation." The pieces clicked together like a perfectly wired electrical circuit. This wasn't random legal pressure, it was sophisticated, coordinated financial warfare designed to crush people systematically before they could mount effective resistance. "Elena, how many other targeted families faced these same insurance threats?" "Every single one, Marcus. All 12 families lost their coverage first, then couldn't afford proper legal representation. Karen has this destruction process down to a cold, calculated science." I spent that night researching Mountain States Insurance through state business filing databases. The corruption web went deeper than I'd imagined. Brent wasn't just a passive investor. He sat on the board of directors, actively making coverage policy decisions. When targeted people lost insurance, they lost contractor licenses. No work meant no money for expensive lawyers. No lawyers meant surrendering valuable property to avoid bankruptcy. The system was diabolically efficient and perfectly legal. But here's where Karen made her first serious tactical mistake. The next morning, I drove to my cabin and discovered a professional surveyor walking my property boundaries with expensive electronic equipment, systematically taking photographs and detailed measurements. When he spotted my truck, he packed up his gear quickly and headed for his vehicle, like he'd been caught stealing copper wire from a construction site. "Excuse me," I called out, jogging across the rocky terrain. "What exactly are you surveying on my property?" He looked genuinely nervous, glancing around like he expected Karen to materialize from behind a pine tree. "Just routine boundary verification work, sir. Nothing for you to worry about." "Boundary verification for exactly who?" I'm really not supposed to discuss details of ongoing projects. But his truck door was standing wide open, and I could clearly see official paperwork scattered across the passenger seat. Whitmore Development LLC was printed boldly across what appeared to be detailed construction proposals and site development plans. The realization hit like ice water in my veins. Karen wasn't just trying to steal my cabin, she was actively planning to develop my entire property. The woman had brass balls the size of bowling balls. I immediately called Jake Rothschild, the independent surveyor Tom Bradley had recommended. "Jake, I need professional boundary verification work done immediately. Something's definitely not adding up here. When would you like me to start? How about right now if you're available?" Jake arrived within 2 hours carrying equipment that looked sophisticated enough for NASA missions. While he methodically set up his gear, I told him about the morning's suspicious surveyor and Elena's insurance conspiracy revelation. "Marcus, let me ask you something critically important," Jake said, carefully adjusting his precision GPS unit. "When you originally purchased this land 6 years ago, did anyone show you the authentic territorial survey from the 1800s? "No, just the modern plat map that Karen provided during the transaction." Jake's professional expression shifted to something between genuine concern and barely contained excitement. "That could be extremely significant for your case. These old mountain properties frequently have major discrepancies between original territorial surveys and modern convenience maps." The thermos coffee I'd brought tasted like anticipation mixed with mounting dread. "What kind of discrepancies are we talking about?" "The kind where your actual property boundaries might be substantially larger than you think, or where their claimed boundaries might be significantly smaller. Original territorial surveys were remarkably accurate. Those pioneer surveyors knew their business. Problems arise when modern developers deliberately redraw historical boundaries for profit." As Jake continued his meticulous work, I remembered the mysterious steel tube I'd discovered during foundation excavations 6 years earlier. Sarah had dismissed it as worthless old mining debris, but what if it wasn't random junk? "Jake, hypothetically, if someone found an old territorial survey marker during construction, would that discovery matter legally?" Jake immediately stopped his work and stared at me with laser focus. "Marcus, please tell me you kept whatever you found." The mountain wind carried pine sap scent mixed with approaching revelation. "Want to see what I've got stored in my basement?" The steel tube in my basement looked like nothing special, just 18 inches of corroded metal I'd pulled from the ground during foundation work. Sarah had laughed when I kept it, calling it my treasure-hunting trophy. Jake handled it like he was examining the Holy Grail. The basement air smelled like concrete dust and old memories as he carefully unscrewed the weathered cap. Inside was a rolled piece of paper, yellowed but remarkably preserved. Jake spread it across my workbench with reverent precision, and I heard his sharp intake of breath. "Marcus," he whispered, voice tight with disbelief. "This is an original 1892 territorial survey. Do you understand what this means?" The hand-drawn lines looked like hieroglyphics to me, but Jake was reading them like gospel. His finger traced boundaries that seemed to extend far beyond what I thought I owned. "According to this document, your eastern property line runs..." He paused, measuring carefully. "Jesus Christ, Marcus. It runs 400 feet past where you think it ends." Before I could ask what that meant, my phone exploded with Elena's panicked voice. "Marcus, get to the cabin now. There are trucks everywhere, and Karen's got some kind of demolition crew." I broke every speed limit climbing that mountain. 3 diesel trucks were parked on my land, crew setting up equipment that looked designed for destruction. Karen stood nearby in a designer hard hat, directing operations like a conquering general. The morning air reeked of diesel exhaust and impending disaster. "Stop right there," I called out, jumping from my truck. "This is private property." Karen's smile could have cut steel. "Not anymore, Mr. Thompson. As of this morning, the HOA has initiated emergency seizure proceedings." She waved legal papers like a battle flag. $47,000 in fines plus legal costs. Your cabin is now community property pending forced sale." The demolition crew leader walked over, sledgehammer in hand like some kind of medieval executioner. "Lady says this structure's condemned and dangerous. We're here to make it safe." That's when Karen made her fatal mistake. She started gloating. "You should have just paid the fines, Marcus. Now you get to watch 6 years of work disappear in one afternoon." The taste of copper rage filled my mouth, but this time it was mixed with something Karen couldn't see coming. Absolute confidence. "Before your crew touches anything," I said, pulling out my phone to record, "I think you should know about some new information regarding property boundaries." Karen laughed, but it sounded hollow. "That old county map? We've had professional surveys, Mr. Thompson. The science is settled." "This isn't a county map." I held up Jake's photographs of the 1892 survey. "It's the original territorial survey, found right here during my foundation work." The demolition crew stopped moving. Karen's face shifted from smug to confused to something approaching terror in about 5 seconds. That's impossible. There are no original surveys for this area." Jake chose that perfect moment to arrive with his equipment and 3 thick folders of verification documents. The sound of his truck door slamming echoed like a judge's gavel. "Ms. Whitmore," he called out, approaching with the confidence of someone holding royal flush cards. "I'm Jake Rothschild, licensed surveyor. I've spent this morning verifying this 1892 survey against territorial archives." Karen's voice came out as a croak. "And? The survey is authentic, properly filed, and legally binding. According to these boundaries," Jake consulted his notes with theatrical precision, "your community center, tennis court, and parking area are all built on Mr. Thompson's private property." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, designer heels scraping on gravel. "You're lying. This is some kind of elaborate fraud." "Ma'am, I'm a licensed professional. My verification is backed by state archives and GPS coordinates. Your facilities have been operating on stolen land for 20 years. The demolition crew was already packing up without being asked. Even they knew when to run from a legal disaster. Karen's phone buzzed constantly, probably Brent wondering why his development dreams were evaporating. "This isn't over," she snarled, but her voice shook like autumn leaves. "I'll fight this in court." "Looking forward to it," I replied. "Hope you've got deep pockets." 20 years of unauthorized commercial use of private property adds up to substantial damages. She fled to her BMW like a retreating army, tires spinning gravel as she escaped. Jake and I stood on my deck, my definitely, legally, historically verified deck, watching her disappear in a cloud of dust and shattered arrogance. "What happens now, Jake?" He grinned like a man who'd just solved the puzzle of the century. "Now we document everything, file the corrected boundaries with the county, and watch Karen explain to her board why they're operating on land they've never owned." The mountain wind carried the scent of pine needles and justice, finely, beautifully served. Jake and I spent 3 days turning my basement into a surveyor's office. The concrete walls echoed with measuring equipment and rustling documents as we built an airtight case. "Marcus, this goes deeper than just your property," Jake said, spreading county maps across my workbench, the musty smell of old paper mixed with fresh coffee. "I've been cross-referencing the 1892 survey with current HOA boundaries." He pointed to yellow highlighted sections. "These areas show major discrepancies between original territorial boundaries and what the HOA claims as common land." "How much land total?" "About 12 acres, but Marcus," Jake's voice dropped to a whisper, "your community center sits dead center in what was originally designated as the Thompson-Morrison homestead claim." Thompson-Morrison. Sarah's maiden name was Morrison. "Jake, are you saying Sarah's family originally owned this land?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. The 1891 territorial claim encompasses most of Pinewood Heights. Your wife wasn't dreaming of a random retreat. She was coming home." The room spun. Sarah had chosen that exact cabin location, down to the eastern exposure and granite outcropping. She'd said it felt right, but never explained why. Jake pulled out state archive photocopies, there in faded ink. "Morrison, Sarah E., 160 acres, Colorado Territory, filed March 15th, 1891. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison. My wife's great-grandfather had literally walked this land and filed the legal claim that made it family property. When Sarah's family abandoned the claim during the Depression, the land reverted to territorial holdings, but the original survey boundaries never changed. They're still legally valid." The copper taste in my mouth transformed into something else. Vindication mixed with grief, mixed with pure joy. Sarah hadn't dreamed of random mountains. Genetic memory had drawn her back to her family's homestead. That evening, Elena arrived with a banker's box of HOA documents. Vanilla candle scent clung to the papers as she spread them across my kitchen table. "Look at this incorporation filing from 2003, she said, pointing to boundary maps. "But check the date on these development plans." The maps were dated 2002. 1 year before the HOA was legally incorporated. "Elena, what am I looking at?" "Preliminary development plans." Karen's family knew about territorial survey discrepancies before they created the HOA. Look at this margin notation. In tiny handwriting. "Original territorial boundaries supersede county maps. Develop accordingly to maximize community land acquisition." They'd known. From day one, Karen's family had planned to build facilities on private land they didn't own. "There's more," Elena continued, pulling out financial records. "Development costs for community facilities, $1.2 million over 20 years, plus maintenance fees collected from residents, $2,400 per household annually since 2003. I calculated quickly. With 89 households, that was over $4 million collected for maintaining facilities built on stolen land. Elena, this isn't just theft. This is conspiracy and fraud on a massive scale. My phone buzzed with Tom Bradley's text. Turn on Channel 7. You need to see this. Sarah Kim's face filled the television screen. Tonight at 6, exclusive investigation reveals systematic property theft in affluent mountain community. HOA president accused of building empire on land she never owned. Aerial footage showed Pinewood Heights facilities built on what the news was calling historically documented private property belonging to local resident. Full details after the break, including documentation suggesting this fraud was planned from the beginning. Elena and I stared at each other. The secret was out. Tomorrow, everyone would know Karen's power structure was built on lies and stolen land. But tonight, sitting with Sarah's territorial survey spread on my table, I felt something I hadn't experienced since she died: peace. Sarah had guided me home to land her family claimed over a century ago. The cabin wasn't just a memorial, it was restoration of her birthright. Mountain wind rattled my windows, sounding like her voice whispering, "Welcome home." The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Sarah Kim's investigative piece had gone viral overnight, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the guy who'd accidentally discovered his HOA was built on stolen land. "Marcus, it's Ralph Morrison," came a gravelly voice I didn't recognize. "I'm a retired civil rights attorney, and I think we might be related." Ralph turned out to be Sarah's second cousin, a connection we'd never made during her lifetime. He arrived that afternoon with legal experience that made Karen's expensive lawyers look like traffic court amateurs. "I've been fighting HOA corruption for 30 years, Ralph said, spreading case files across my kitchen table. The smell of his pipe tobacco mixed with Elena's fresh coffee as our informal war council took shape. "But I've never seen systematic fraud this well documented." Ralph explained property law like he was teaching a masterclass. When an HOA builds facilities on private property without legal ownership, they become what's called trespassers with improvements. Under Colorado law, you can demand immediate removal of all structures or negotiate fair market compensation. Jake calculated the numbers: $1.2 million in facility construction, plus $4 million in maintenance fees collected over 20 years, plus current market value of the land itself. "We're looking at approximately $5 million in damages," Jake announced, voice carrying the satisfaction of an accountant who'd just found the world's biggest math error. But Ralph cautioned against celebrating too early. "Karen's going to fight this with everything she's got. Expect character assassination, legal delays, and probably some creative attempts at evidence destruction." Elena had been quietly organizing documents while we talked. "What about the other families she's targeted? Don't they deserve justice too?" That's when Tom Bradley walked in with news that changed everything. "I've been reaching out to every family Karen forced out over the years," he said, pulling up a chair with military precision. 12 families total. All of them want in on a class action lawsuit. Ralph's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Tom, do you understand what you've just handed me? 12 families with identical discrimination stories, plus documented evidence of systematic fraud? That's not just a property dispute, that's a federal civil rights case." Over the next week, my house became headquarters for what felt like a military operation. Elena coordinated document collection, making copies of everything Karen had tried to hide. Tom handled communications with affected families, building a coalition that had Karen seriously outnumbered. Jake worked with 2 additional surveyors to verify property boundaries throughout Pinewood Heights. They discovered 3 more families whose land had been illegally absorbed into common areas. Ralph taught me the legal strategy in terms I could understand. Property law is like electrical work, Marcus. Current flows along established paths unless something blocks it. Karen's been blocking legitimate property rights for 20 years. We're about to restore proper current flow. The knowledge that HOAs can't legally supersede recorded property boundaries was something every homeowner should understand. Most people assume HOA maps are official, but only government surveys and recorded deeds have true legal authority. Sarah Kim continued investigating, uncovering political connections between Karen's family and county officials who'd rubber-stamped questionable development permits. "There's a pattern here," Sarah explained during one of our strategy sessions. "The Whitmore family has been manipulating local government for profit since 2001. Your property case might be just the tip of the iceberg." By week's end, we'd assembled evidence that would make federal prosecutors drool. financial records, witness testimony, government corruption, and documented discrimination patterns. Ralph scheduled depositions for affected families, teaching each person how to present their story clearly and powerfully. "The truth is our most powerful weapon," he said. "Karen's built her empire on lies. Truth cuts through lies like a hot knife through butter." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We'd present our evidence at the next scheduled HOA meeting with full media coverage and county officials present. Let Karen try to spin systematic fraud in front of television cameras and state investigators. Elena suggested timing the revelation for maximum community impact. The annual HOA meeting is next month. Everyone will be there, including people who've been afraid to speak up before. Tom coordinated security, knowing Karen might try desperate measures as her world collapsed. His military training proved invaluable for anticipating enemy tactics. Jake prepared enlarged maps and charts showing the true property boundaries versus Karen's fabricated claims, visual evidence that even Karen's supporters couldn't argue with. Ralph filed preliminary motions establishing legal groundwork for property restoration and damage recovery. "We're not just playing defense anymore," he said with grim satisfaction. "Now we're on the attack." The smell of victory mixed with fresh determination filled my house as we prepared for the final confrontation. Sarah's territorial survey had become the key that unlocked 20 years of systematic corruption. But the best part? Every night, I'd drive up to the cabin and sit on the deck Sarah had sketched. The mountain wind through the pine trees sounded like her voice encouraging me to fight for what was right. Her family's land. Our land. Home. Karen's desperation became visible within days of the news breaking. She called an emergency HOA meeting, packing the community center with supporters and what looked suspiciously like hired muscle. 3 guys in expensive suits who definitely weren't homeowners. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen announced from the podium, voice shaking with barely controlled panic, "we're dealing with a coordinated attack on our community by outside agitators spreading malicious lies." Outside agitators. She was talking about me, a guy who'd been quietly building a cabin for 6 years. The air in the room felt thick with tension and Karen's desperate perfume. About 40 residents had shown up, split roughly down the middle between Karen loyalists and people finally brave enough to question her authority. "Mr. Thompson's so-called evidence," Karen continued, "consists of forged documents and manipulated surveys designed to steal community property through legal trickery." Tom Bradley stood up from the back row. "Karen, are you seriously claiming that territorial archives and professional surveyors are part of some conspiracy?" "I'm claiming that certain people will do anything to avoid paying legitimate HOA fees," Karen snapped back. But here's where Karen made her biggest mistake yet. In her desperation to discredit the evidence, she revealed information she shouldn't have known. Everyone should know that Marcus Thompson has been secretly meeting with radical property rights activists and hostile media figures for weeks, planning this elaborate fraud scheme. The room went dead quiet. Elena and I looked at each other with growing alarm. Karen had just admitted to surveilling my private activities. "How exactly would you know about private meetings, Karen?" Ralph Morrison asked, voice carrying the deadly calm of an experienced prosecutor. Karen's face went pale as she realized what she'd just admitted. Community leaders need to stay informed about threats to neighborhood safety." "Are you saying you've been spying on community members?" "I'm saying I protect this community from people who would destroy it." After the meeting, things escalated quickly. Someone slashed my truck tires in the community center parking lot. When I called the sheriff, Deputy Rodriguez took a report but warned me that property disputes can get heated. The next morning, I found my cabin's solar panels had been damaged by what looked like deliberate vandalism. Scratches in the glass that would cost thousands to repair. But Karen's most desperate move came 3 days later. I was meeting with Jake at the cabin, documenting the vandalism for insurance purposes, when a black SUV pulled up. 2 men in suits climbed out, followed by a woman with a briefcase who looked like she charged by the minute. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Whitmore Development, LLC. We'd like to discuss a business proposition." The woman's smile felt as artificial as her blonde highlights. The morning air carried the scent of pine needles and approaching trouble. "What kind of proposition?" "Our clients are prepared to offer you $850,000 cash for immediate sale of your property, including a waiver of all HOA claims and disputes." $850,000, more money than I'd see in 5 lifetimes of electrical work. "That's a generous offer," I said carefully. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Simply sign these documents, and within 48 hours, you'll have more money than you ever imagined. You can build 10 cabins anywhere else in Colorado. But I could see Jake filming everything on his phone from inside the cabin, and something about the suit's body language suggested this wasn't really a negotiation. What happens if I say no? The woman's smile disappeared like smoke. Mr. Thompson, litigation is expensive and unpredictable. You might win, you might lose, but legal fees will drain your resources either way. This offer guarantees financial security. And if I still say no? One of the suits stepped closer. Accidents happen on remote mountain properties. Equipment fails. Insurance gets canceled. Sometimes it's better to take the sure thing. There it was. Not quite a threat, but close enough to make the message clear. I'll need time to consider your offer, I said, keeping my voice steady. 24 hours, the woman replied. After that, the offer expires and other options become necessary. After they left, Jake and I sat on the deck reviewing his recordings. The threats weren't explicit enough for criminal charges, but they were clear enough to understand. Marcus, they're scared, Jake said. 800 grand means they know the real damages are way higher. That evening, Ralph confirmed our suspicions. I've seen this playbook before. First, they try to buy you off. When that fails, they escalate to intimidation and sabotage. Eventually, they'll attempt something that forces you to surrender or relocate. Tom Bradley's military experience kicked in. We need security cameras and motion detectors. If Karen's hiring muscle, things are about to get serious. But I was done being intimidated. Sarah's family had claimed this land over 130 years ago. Karen's threats just proved we were winning. The next morning, I called Jennifer Walsh back. Ms. Walsh, this is Marcus Thompson. I've considered your offer. And? Tell Karen she can take her blood money and shove it where the mountain sunshine doesn't reach. See you at the next HOA meeting. The war was escalating, but I was ready for whatever came next. Karen's response to my rejection came swift and vicious. Within 48 hours, I received a letter from the county health department claiming my cabin's septic system was contaminating groundwater and posing public health risks. The letter smelled like desperation and legal letterhead as I read it twice, trying to understand how a system that had passed inspection 6 months ago was suddenly a biohazard. I called the health department directly. This is Marcus Thompson. I received a contamination notice, but my system was recently inspected and approved. Mr. Thompson, we've received multiple complaints about sewage odors and water quality issues. Our inspector will need immediate access for testing. Multiple complaints from whom? I was 12 miles from the nearest neighbor. The inspector arrived the next morning, Dale Whitmore, Karen's cousin-in-law, wearing a health department badge instead of his usual building inspector uniform. Fancy seeing you here, Dale, I said, watching him climb out of a county vehicle. Didn't know you worked for health department too. Cross-training, he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Where's your septic access? I led him to the system I'd installed according to county specifications, with professional permits and inspections every step of the way. Dale spent 20 minutes taking measurements and water samples, scribbling notes on forms with obvious reluctance. Everything looks adequate, he admitted finally, but we'll need lab results to clear the contamination reports. After he left, I called Jake Rothschild. Something's not right. Dale seemed like he was going through motions instead of conducting a real inspection. Marcus, I think Karen's trying to create a paper trail of violations to justify seizure, Jake replied. Classic harassment technique, bureaucratic warfare. But here's where Karen overplayed her hand. That afternoon, Elena called with intelligence that changed everything. Marcus, my neighbor Janet Fletcher has been acting strange lately. Today, she finally broke down and confessed something important. Janet was the HOA treasurer, one of Karen's inner circle who'd always supported the aggressive enforcement tactics. What did she tell you? Karen's been skimming money from the HOA budget for years. Janet has copies of financial records showing unauthorized payments to family members, fake consulting fees, and expense accounts that don't exist. Elena's voice carried the excitement of someone who'd found the smoking gun. Janet's scared, Marcus. She thinks Karen's going to blame her when everything collapses. She wants to cooperate with authorities in exchange for immunity. The next morning brought another escalation. I arrived at the cabin to find survey stakes spray-painted bright orange throughout my property, with condemned structure signs posted on trees. But these weren't official county markers. The paint was still wet, and the signs were printed on Karen's home computer. I could tell because they used the same Comic Sans font she used for HOA newsletters. I was photographing the fake condemnation signs when Tom Bradley's truck pulled up, followed by a vehicle I didn't recognize. "Marcus, meet Detective Susan Torres from the State Fraud Investigation Unit," Tom said, climbing out with a woman in a business suit who looked like she ate white-collar criminals for breakfast. "Mr. Thompson, we've been investigating HOA corruption patterns statewide," Detective Torres said, shaking my hand with a grip that meant business. "Your case has caught our attention because it involves multiple felonies across jurisdictional lines." She pulled out a thick file folder. "Financial fraud, conspiracy, abuse of governmental process, and what appears to be organized criminal activity. We'd like your permission to install surveillance equipment on your property." "What kind of surveillance?" "Hidden cameras and audio recording devices. If Karen's people are planning additional sabotage or intimidation, we want evidence that will hold up in federal court." The smell of pine needles mixed with the scent of justice finally being served as Detective Torres explained the scope of her investigation. "The Whitmore family's corruption extends beyond your HOA. We're looking at coordinated schemes involving 3 counties and approximately $12 million in fraudulent development projects. Over the next week, state investigators turned my cabin into a high-tech monitoring station. Cameras hidden in trees, motion detectors disguised as rocks, and audio equipment that could pick up conversations from 100 yards away. Karen must have sensed the walls closing in because her behavior became increasingly erratic. Elena reported that Karen had started drinking heavily during HOA board meetings, making accusations against residents who questioned her authority. Tom Bradley organized security patrols by sympathetic neighbors, making sure someone was always watching my property for suspicious activity. Ralph Morrison prepared comprehensive criminal referral packages for state and federal prosecutors, documenting every aspect of Karen's systematic fraud operation. The mountain air carried the scent of approaching storms and approaching justice as we prepared for the final confrontation. Karen was trapped, desperate, and dangerous, exactly when cornered animals become most unpredictable. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Sarah's territorial survey had started an avalanche of truth that was going to bury Karen's empire of lies once and for all. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for next week. Karen's last stand was coming, and this time, the whole world would be watching. The annual HOA meeting was standing room only. Every seat in the community center was filled, plus another 30 people standing along the walls. Local news crews had set up cameras in the back, and I spotted Detective Torres near the exit with what looked like backup officers in plain clothes. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the scent of too many people crammed into too small a space. Karen stood at the podium looking like a general preparing for her last battle, designer suit pressed and makeup applied with military precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, voice projecting false confidence, "tonight we address the malicious attacks on our community by individuals seeking to destroy everything we've built together." She clicked to her first PowerPoint slide, a photo of my cabin with illegal structure stamped across it in red letters. "Mr. Marcus Thompson has fabricated evidence and manipulated government officials in an elaborate fraud scheme designed to steal community property worth millions of dollars." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. About half the residents still believed Karen's version of events, but I could see doubt creeping into their expressions. "The so-called territorial survey is an obvious forgery," Karen continued, warming to her theme. "Professional analysis proves these documents were artificially aged and planted on the property to support false boundary claims." That's when Ralph Morrison stood up in the third row. "Ms. Whitmore, did you just claim that Colorado State Archives contain forged documents?" "I'm claiming that desperate people will forge anything to avoid legitimate financial obligations." "Then you won't mind if we present additional evidence for community consideration?" Karen's face flushed. "This meeting follows established procedures, Mr. Morrison. Disruptive outbursts won't be tolerated." But Ralph was already walking toward the front of the room, carrying a briefcase that looked like it contained evidence for the trial of the century. "Members of the community," Ralph announced, voice carrying the authority of 30 years in courtrooms. "I'm Ralph Morrison, a retired civil rights attorney and, coincidentally, Sarah Thompson's cousin." Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's supporters looked confused, unsure whether this development helped or hurt their position. "I've spent the past month investigating HOA operations and discovered systematic fraud that extends far beyond property boundaries." Ralph opened his briefcase and pulled out enlarged photographs. "These are financial records provided by your own treasurer, Janet Fletcher. showing unauthorized payments totaling $127,000 over 4 years. Janet stood up from her seat near the back, face pale, but voice steady. I can't stay silent anymore. Karen has been embezzling community funds and using HOA resources to attack families who couldn't afford to fight back. The room erupted. Residents shouted questions, Karen demanded order, and news cameras captured every moment of the chaos. But I was waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the knockout punch. Order! Order! Karen screamed, pounding her gavel like she was driving nails. These are lies spread by vindictive individuals seeking revenge for legitimate enforcement actions. That's when I stood up and walked to the front of the room. The crowd gradually quieted, sensing something important was about to happen. Karen, I said, voice carrying to every corner of the packed room, before you continue calling people liars, I think everyone should know exactly where your community center is built. I nodded to Jake Rothschild, who was operating a laptop connected to the projection screen. The 1892 territorial survey appeared on screen, enlarged and highlighted to show property boundaries that extended far beyond what anyone in the room had imagined. This is the original territorial survey for this area, I announced, watching Karen's face drain of color. Filed with the Colorado Territorial Government in 1892 and verified by state archives. The boundary lines clearly showed my property encompassing the community center, tennis courts, and half the parking lot. According to this legal document, every person in this room is currently sitting on my private property. Stunned silence filled the room like thick fog. Even Karen's most loyal supporters stared at the projection screen in disbelief. That's impossible, Karen whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. It gets better, I continued, feeling the momentum building. Your family knew about these boundary discrepancies before the HOA was ever created. You've been operating community facilities on stolen land for 20 years, collecting fees for property you never owned. Detective Torres chose that moment to step forward, badge visible on her jacket. Ms. Whitmore, I'm Detective Susan Torres with the Colorado State Fraud Investigation Unit. Based on evidence presented here tonight, you're under investigation for conspiracy, embezzlement, and systematic fraud. Karen's world collapsed in real time. Her supporters abandoned her one by one, residents demanded answers she couldn't provide, and news cameras recorded every moment of her public destruction. This meeting is adjourned, Karen announced desperately, but nobody moved. Tom Bradley called for an emergency vote of no confidence. The motion passed 73-2, with only Karen and one confused supporter opposing. As chaos erupted around us, I felt Sarah's presence in the mountain wind, flowing through open doors. Her family's land was finally free from 20 years of corruption. Justice, served cold as mountain air. Within 72 hours of the meeting, Karen resigned from the HOA board in writing. Her letter was 3 sentences long, typed on crumpled paper that smelled like desperation and defeat. No apology, no acknowledgement, just terse notification that she was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. Detective Torres arrested Karen the following week on charges of embezzlement, conspiracy, and fraud. The state investigation uncovered $73,000 in missing HOA funds and systematic corruption dating back to 2003. Brent Whitmore faced separate charges for insurance fraud and governmental abuse. The new HOA board, democratically elected with Elena Rodriguez as president and Tom Bradley as vice president, moved quickly to repair damage. They hired independent auditors, established transparent procedures, and formally apologized for the harassment campaign. My cabin fines were dismissed completely. The HOA paid $23,000 in legal costs and purchased the community center land from me at fair market value, $340,000, which I donated entirely to establish Sarah's Workshop Foundation. Sarah's foundation became something beautiful. We converted an old warehouse into a comprehensive training center offering free electrical, plumbing, and construction education for single parents, veterans, and anyone struggling to rebuild their lives. Our first graduating class included 12 students, 4 single mothers who learned electrical systems, 3 veterans who started contracting businesses, and Elena Rodriguez, who at age 67 became a certified solar installer. The smell of sawdust and possibility filled our workshop every morning. Tom Bradley organized monthly support groups for families targeted by HOA abuse. Ralph Morrison donated time mentoring attorneys fighting corrupt community associations. The ripple effects extended far beyond Pinewood Heights. Sarah Kim's investigative series won a state journalism award and prompted legislative hearings on HOA reform. 3 neighboring communities launched boundary verification projects, discovering similar property theft patterns. Karen and Brent were forced to sell their house at significant loss to pay restitution. They relocated to Arizona, where criminal convictions would follow them forever. Derek Whitmore resigned from the county commission after proven ethics violations. But the most satisfying resolution was personal. I completed Sarah's cabin exactly as she'd sketched. Eastern exposure for sunrise coffee, granite fireplace for winter evenings, deck perfect for watching valley storms. Her copper drawer pulls caught morning light like captured sunshine. The cabin became a gathering place for neighbors who'd been afraid during Karen's reign. Elena hosted monthly tamale nights on my deck. Tom organized veteran meetings in my living room. Jake taught boundary law to anyone protecting property rights. Every morning I sat on Sarah's deck with coffee that tasted like gratitude, watching sunrise over land her family claimed 130 years ago. Mountain wind through pine trees carried honest laughter and brewing coffee scents. The key lesson for homeowners: HOAs cannot legally supersede recorded property boundaries. Most people assume HOA maps are official, but only government surveys and recorded deeds carry true legal authority. Knowledge that protects families from decades of harassment. Sarah's territorial survey hangs framed in my living room beside her original cabin sketches. Visitors ask about the connection between the faded 1892 document and modern home around them. I tell them it's how love transcends time, family roots grow deeper than anyone imagines, and sometimes coming home means fighting for what was always yours. The Sarah's Workshop Foundation continues growing with expansion plans for 3 additional Colorado communities. We've helped 87 people start businesses and provided free home repairs for 34 elderly residents who couldn't afford contractor prices. 6 years after Karen tried stealing my cabin, I host the annual Pinewood Heights Festival on land she claimed belonged to everyone but me. Children play on playground equipment built by Sarah's Workshop graduates, while parents share strategies for protecting property rights. The mountain wind still sounds like Sarah's voice whispering encouragement. Her family's homestead is finally free from corruption, transformed into a place where working families learn to build their own futures. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's worth the wait. Drop a comment below with your worst HOA nightmare. Let's expose these power-hungry bullies together and help other families avoid similar traps. Hit that subscribe button because I've got 5 more David versus Goliath stories that'll restore your faith that truth and persistence still matter in America.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video. Drop a comment with your reaction and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.